Hi guys, in this video I'm going to be solving the let versus const challenge in the Pairwise curriculum. So in this challenge we have a pretty simple code snippet in the editor here, and the instructions say uncomment the code in the editor and then hover over Pairwise and note the error. Alright, so let's do that. So if I uncomment this, you can see that I get this error underneath Pairwise, and if I hover over that, we say const declarations must be initialized. And so the idea here is that in TypeScript, you have two ways to define a new variable. You can define with let or const keyword. And the basic idea is that a let defined variable can be redefined later on, whereas a const defined variable is constant and cannot be redefined. So this is the basic idea. And so our error right here is saying that the const declaration must be initialized because we cannot later come down here and say const pairwise equals the string pairwise. We cannot come down here and reassign pairwise because it's constant. And so in order for this to be initialized correctly, we have to initialize it here in the definition to a string value like this. And if I do that, you'll see that that first error goes away, but I still have an error here because it's still constant and I still cannot reassign it. So this is very helpful because fundamentally when you're writing a program, there is some data that you may want to redefine, and there's other data that maybe you don't want to redefine. Like maybe you have some kind of like special global setting, which let's just say it's the number 52, and you don't want this to ever change. You never want this value to change, and it always needs to be the same everywhere, and you just simply know this from the outset when you're writing a program. So this makes sense to define using the const keyword. You wouldn't want to define it with let, or rather you would rather not have the possibility that this gets changed in the future. And so the value would be different when you're using it in your program while the program is running. So when you have data like that, it's useful to be able to define it using the const keyword so that it can't be redefined. And that's what we can do here. But in other cases, maybe you know like, okay, this is some data that is going to change throughout the program or in this function or wherever you are. And in that case, it makes sense to define it using let. And if we do that here, you will see that we can, in fact, reassign pairwise to be a different string later on. So this is the basic difference between let and const. And again, these are both ways that we can use, keywords that we can use to define variables in TypeScript. Now, there's one more thing I want to make a point of here, which is that what if we have a different declaration? Like we say const my object equals an object, and then we say pairwise equals the string pairwise. Now, if we want to say my object equals, let's say, true, this is going to be a type error. And if we hover over this, we see we cannot assign to my object because it is a constant. So that's fine. That is still what we would expect. But if I come over here and I say my object dot pairwise, and then I'm going to say equals the string true, this actually compiles. And if I do console.log my object, and if I do that before and after and run the code, you'll see that I get pairwise is the string pairwise, and then I get pairwise is the string true. So I effectively changed this key value pair within this const defined object. So how is that possible? I thought this was supposed to be constant because we use the const keyword. How can we change the data in it? So this is a slightly tricky point in the let versus const discussion, but it's very important. And the point is that the actual variable declaration itself cannot be reassigned if you use const. But in the case of objects, like this object here, or also, for example, arrays, the way that they work in TypeScript is that the variable declaration itself, if you're defining an object, the variable points to that object in memory. But the two things are actually separate. You have the variable, which points to the object in memory, and then you have the object in memory itself. And those two things are, in fact, different. And so if you have a const declaration, it does not prevent you from changing the data itself that variable points to. It does prevent you from reassigning the variable. Now, with data primitives like strings or numbers or booleans, things like this, the data and the variable are essentially the same thing. And so if you have a const defined variable which represents a string or a number, then you really cannot reassign it. The behavior is like you would expect, but you do have this subtle edge case with objects or arrays, which is that you can in fact change the data inside of them. So if this was instead const list, and let's say we have some numbers, and then we want to do list.push the number 5, we will see that we can in fact push a new number onto this list. So we can effectively mutate the data in the list even though it's defined as const. But if we came down here and we say list equals 1, 2, 3, 5, we cannot do this. We cannot reassign list to point to a new array of data. Even though this array is the same as the array I essentially created here by pushing 5 onto the original array, we cannot reassign the list variable, but we can mutate the contents. So this is a subtle difference between the let and const usage when it comes to arrays and objects, but it's really important to understand because it's important to not think that if you define something like this with const, it prevents you from changing the data inside the array. So there's other ways to kind of, let's say, deal with that. But in general, this is a really important point to be aware of when you're learning about const and let with variable declarations. Anyway, just to return to the present challenge, we have in fact solved the challenge. So let's go ahead and run the code. And we will see that the string should actually be equal to the lowercase string pairwise. So let's try that again. And we will see that this passes the tests. All right, so that's going to wrap it up for this video. If you liked that, please like the video and feel free to subscribe to the channel. We will have a lot of other videos like this coming in the future. And if you thought this was interesting or you wanted to try to solve some challenges like this yourself, please check out the Pairwise curriculum. We have hundreds of different challenges that are all teaching the basics of how to program. And with that, I'm going to wrap it up and we will see you in the next video.